In this talk, we are going to learn about different aspects of population ecology. Ecology is the study of interactions among organisms and their environment. This includes both biotic and abiotic components. Biotic components are those that include all the living organisms, whether they be plants or microbes or animals or fungi or protists. Abiotic components are the non-living features present in the environment. This can include sunlight, wind, water, soil, mountains, so on and so forth. Ecology comprises of different levels that are organized in a hierarchical manner. The first level is the individual organism. Different organisms that belong to the same species form a population. A population that is spatially separated from others but can interact with members present in other locations is a metapopulation. Different populations in a region form a community. An ecosystem is a region that comprises of all the living and non-living components that are present in that region. A biome is an area that has a similar climate and geographical features. It usually harbors ecologically similar communities of plants and animals and includes different ecosystems. The biosphere includes all the biomes that are present on Earth. Population ecology is the study of how biotic and abiotic factors can influence different aspects of populations. Different characteristics that are studied in population ecology include the population range, the dispersion of the population, and changes in the population size and growth with time. Population range is the area that a population occupies. For example, the map shown below tells us about the population range of black bears in Northern America. Organisms can be found in certain geographical regions on Earth. In order to survive in these regions, the organisms adapt to the conditions present in their range. For example, if the range has a cold temperature, then the animals tend to have thick fur, which will be different for animals living in other types of environments. Population ranges can fluctuate with time. This can be due to environmental changes, the ability to overcome inhospitable habitats and hence colonize previously unoccupied areas, and in this scenario, the range of the population increases. We can also have scenarios where there are human-based alterations of environment that can change the range. For example, when we look at the range of black bears now, which is the recent range, and compare it with the historic range, we are able to see that the range of black bears is much lesser than what it was before. A lot of this can be attributed to changes of the environment that is due to human activity. Population dispersion is the spacing and movement of individuals in a population. There are different types of dispersion, and they depend on environmental factors and social factors. One type of population dispersion is clumped. This is a commonly observed dispersion, and in this case, we are able to see that individuals in the population tend to be in close vicinity to one another. Thus, they tend to form groups. There can be plenty of empty spaces between different groups of the population. The clumped dispersion is influenced by resource availability and helps the individual of the populations with mating and defending themselves against predators because there are many individuals present in one group. On the contrary, uniform distribution occurs when individuals are evenly distributed in their range. The uniform distribution may be influenced by social interactions. For example, if the individuals are territorial, then they will ensure that only certain organisms are within their reach. Another type of dispersion is random dispersion. In this scenario, the position of each individual is independent of other individuals. Thus, there can be some places where the individuals seem to be grouped together, while other places where they are evenly distributed. Random distribution occurs in the absence of any type of strong attractions or repulsions among the individuals present in the population. Another aspect that is studied in population ecology is population size. The size of a population is determined by different factors, including birth, death, immigration, which is individuals entering into a population, and immigration, which is individuals leaving a population. The population size can be studied by examining the whole population, where every individual organism will be counted to find out the population size. This is quite tedious. Another way to study population size is to estimate the population size through an extrapolation process by using small groups that are present within a population. Population demography is the quantitative study of different aspects of the populations like the rates of birth, death, migrations, etc. The size of a population depends on the growth of the population. Population growth is the change in the number of members of a population at a location during a particular time period. There are many different factors that can affect population growth. These include the sex ratio of the population, generation times of individuals in the population, age distribution, fecundity, the number of reproductive events, as well as the ability of offspring to survive till reproductive age, and finally, the environmental resources that are available in the population. Sex ratio is the comparison of the number of males to the number of females present in a population. Sex ratios are important if the population reproduces sexually. Usually, in such scenarios, it is the females who give birth to the offspring. Hence, the growth of the population is dependent on the females that are present in the population. More females usually correlates with more birds and hence more population growth. Let us take an example of this map where we are able to see the sex ratios of humans across different regions in the world. The more red color is observed, there are more females compared to males, while if there is more blue color, there is more males compared to females. It is usually ideal to have 50% of the population as males and 50% of the population as females. Generation times are the average interval between the birth of an individual and the birth of its offspring. The lesser the time between the birth of the individual and the birth of its offspring, the faster the growth in the population. That is why we can see that some populations grow much more rapidly in size than other populations. Age structure also plays an important role in population growth. As we have different number of age groups in a population, it can affect the growth of the population. The age structure is the proportionate number of people in different age categories in a given population for a defined period of time. The more individuals of reproductive age that are present in the population, there is more population growth. The population growth will slow down if enough offspring are not born. The age structure and age-specific summary of survival and reproductive rates within a population can be shown in the form of a life table. A life table is usually made by following the fate of a group of individuals that belong to the same age. This group of individuals is called as a cohort. In the life table that is shown here, we are following 840 seedlings that belong to the meadowgrass. Thus, these 843 seedlings are our cohort. As observed in the life table, we are able to see the time span that is being studied. In this case, we are looking at 3-month intervals over a span of 2 years. The life table shows us the number of seedlings that are alive at the beginning of each time interval. we are able to see that as time passes, there are lesser and lesser seedlings that are alive. It also shows us the deaths of the seedlings during each time interval. We are able to see that at the early time intervals, there is an increase in the death, but as the time passes, there is a decrease in the number of deaths, probably because there are not that many that are alive to begin with at the later time intervals. We can also look at the reproductive potential of these 843 seedlings by looking at the seeds produced during each time interval. Once again, we see that there is an increase in the earlier time intervals and then there is a decrease. We're also able to see that the 843 seedlings gave rise to 1,665 seeds, which are its progeny. Thus, a life table provides many different pieces of information about a population. Life tables can also be shown graphically as survivorship curves. A survivorship curve is a graphical representation of the percentage of an original population that survives to a given age. Survivorship curves show the age distribution of populations with time. There are different types of survivorship curves, and the first one, called as the type 1 survivorship curve, shows that these organisms tend to have lower death rates or mortality at earlier ages. However, as they become older, there is more mortality in these groups. An example of such an organism that shows a type 1 survivorship curve are humans. Organisms that show a type 2 survivorship curve tend to show constant death rates over a lifespan. Thus, the death rate when they are younger is similar to the death rate of individuals that are older in the population. In the case of type 3 survivorship curves, we're able to see a high mortality in the young organisms, but as they get older, there is a lower mortality rate. This could happen because there are many offspring that are born, and hence their mortality tends to be higher because the parents do not provide as much care since there are too many progeny. The patterns of survival and reproduction events that are typical for any member of a species during their lifetime constitutes their life cycle or their life history. All organisms reproduce during their lifetimes. However, reproduction is energy intensive. Reproduction is also dependent on the resources available, and hence different organisms have different reproductive patterns. Each organism has a theoretical number of offspring that it can produce in its lifetime. This corresponds to the fecundity of the organism. Organisms that have a high fecundity tend to invest low energy towards their offspring. They spend a lot of their energy in making many offspring, and these offspring have the tendency to develop quickly without any parental support. The offspring are usually small and are more vulnerable to predation, and hence not many of them survive. An example of organisms that show high fecundity include frogs and other types of insects and marine animals that tend to be small. Organisms with low fecundity are those that produce lesser number of offspring. They invest a lot of energy in providing more care to the offspring and hence ensure that the offspring survive better than those that have higher fecundity. This is because they don't have many offspring to begin with, and hence to ensure the survival of the species, it is important that the limited offspring that they do produce survive. While fecundity is a measure of how many offspring an organism can produce, organisms can produce the offspring either in one reproductive event or many reproductive events. Simulparity is when an organism reproduces only once in their lifetime, while heteroparity is when the members of a population can reproduce multiple times during their life cycle. Heteroparous organisms tend to show a trade-off between their current reproductive efforts and future reproductive successes. Let us take the example of birds. The number of eggs that are present in a bird's nest, which represents the clutch size, is usually less than the previous year. Thus, the number of offspring in later reproductive events are less than previous reproductive events. This phenomenon is called as the cost of reproduction. The cost of reproduction is indicative of how energy-intensive reproduction is for members of a population. Populations grow when the offspring produced are able to survive. However, it is important to note that a species can successfully propagate from one generation to another only when the offspring not only survives but also reproduces successfully. Thus, the number of offspring produced is not as important as how many of these offsprings are able to survive and reproduce themselves. There is a balance between the number of offspring and the size of the offspring in different populations. Let us take the examples of birds again. Birds that tend to lay lesser eggs usually end up with offsprings that are larger in size, while those that lay many eggs tend to give rise to offsprings that are smaller in size. Larger offsprings are known to have a greater chance of survival. However, they require more energy when it comes to the parents being able to give rise to such type of offspring. Producing small offspring may usually result in low survival rates. Hence, when offspring are usually small, then many of them are normally produced by the individual. Different species have different ages at which they begin to reproduce. The age at which the organism reproduces for the first time normally correlates with its lifespan. Species that are long-lived tend to delay reproduction. They're able to obtain more energy stores, and the advantage of delaying reproduction is that when they are younger or juveniles, they're able to gain experience before they're having their own children, which results in a high cost of reproduction. On the other hand, if organisms are short-lived, then they reproduce very early in life. Because for them, time is very important, and by delaying reproduction, it may mean that they may never reproduce at all. Thus, the age of reproduction tends to correlate with the lifespan of organisms. Over time, a population attains a certain size such that even if there are many offspring born, the size does not change. This usually occurs due to the availability of resources. Resource availability in the environment affects life histories. When resources are abundant, the population is able to grow quickly, as shown in the graph where we see exponential growth of the population. However, when resources become limited, then the population starts to grow slowly, and this is because the cost of reproduction is high since there is not a lot of resources available. With this, we come to the end of our talk, where we learned about basic aspects of population ecology, which includes learning about the population range, population dispersion, as well as population size. We also learned about the different factors that can affect population growth.